Welcome to The Wanderers, a branch of the Collage podcast that is a production of Feed My Sheep. Feed My Sheep is a nonprofit in Temple, Texas that has a goal of feeding people that are hungry physically, spiritually, and emotionally. In this podcast, we discuss Scripture, and our hope is that you would be fed spiritually through the reading and discussing of His Word. Hello, welcome to the Feed My Sheep podcast. Today I am here with Jeff and Jonah, and we are going to be talking about John 9. So if you are following along and want to turn there, that is where we'll be, and I will read the whole chapter. Today we are going to learn about Jesus healing a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And after saying this, he spit on the ground and made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "and wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. And so the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begged, asking, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" And some claimed that he was, and others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. And he replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. And they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. And therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" And so they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And the man replied, "He is a prophet." They still do not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "Well, we know he's our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes we do not know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." And he replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." And they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" And they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." And the man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes? We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." And to this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Okay. What are your initial thoughts? There's a lot going on in this passage. It is quite a long story comparatively to other healing stories that we've gone over, but this one gets a whole chapter.
Yeah, I'm thankful there's not like 4 versions of this for us to read, because we would do that the entire podcast and say, all right, well, we'll catch you next time. This is a good one. For me, gosh, there's a lot of dense theology here if you really want to get into it. There's also just like, as the man says, all I know is I was blind and now I see. And so it's like this interesting mix of like some really significant theological things that are being said throughout the passage, both by the author and what they're trying to say by sharing the story within the gospel, but then also by the Jewish leaders, by Jesus himself, lots there. But then it also is something really simple too, that even like a child would be like, yeah, like he was blind and Jesus made him see, and that's his whole story, you know, and that's just, it's a really cool kind of approach to this story. The first thing that caught my attention, verse 3, you know, the disciples asked Jesus, hey, why'd this happen? Was it because, did he sin? Did his parents? There's an assumption that somebody messed up, and that's why this guy's the way he is. And Jesus just replies, no, neither this man nor his parents have sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And the first question that just came to my mind, and I highlighted that as we were reading through it, was, are there things that happen in our lives simply so that the works of God might be displayed in us? And then we see people, maybe it's easier to talk about ourselves than it is to look at other people, but we see people in great pain and great struggle and all sorts of challenges. Many of our friends here that are, you know, served by Feed My Sheep and that find a place here. Are there stories of things that have happened to people simply so that God's work in their lives would be made known? What do you think about that?
It is so just that is a struggle, because like here in the world, like so the world that we're in, there's much addiction, there's much things. Okay, so like we would use different words. Okay, do I run across people every day that, oh man, okay, this is one that is difficult for me. Are there people that I run across every day that they are suffering from issues because of decisions their parents made? I.e., I was using meth while you were in my tummy, and this person is developmentally having issues that were not necessarily theirs to have, but they were mistakes, i.e. sins that the parents have made. So there's ramifications of it that are, we can go look and see things. I mean, there's things, and whether you use the word sins or not, so then I'd go, there's a part of me that would go, oh gosh, yes, I see people that's the case. We can go walk right outside and I'll go, hey, I'd like for you to meet so-and-so's mom was using meth when he was born and his whole life, and that would maybe explain this. Then there's another part of me that would look at the same coin and go, oh, it must not be that way. Like, man, what in the world, in a different, more theological slant of, am I just simply a victim of the decisions my parents and grandparents made? Well, maybe you could do it, but you're going, no, man, that's not a free will life to live. I'm just living out of theirs, and I'm perpetuating generational mistakes. And so you'd go, huh. And so then it gives me a little bit of maybe a way to live and go, well, this just stinks, but this just is my parents.
Yeah.
This is them.
I love that when I think deeply about that, there's something about Jesus encountering all of these people in the gospel. And in some sense, it doesn't matter if it was their parents that sinned, or if this person is completely guiltless, he brings everyone into the kingdom
Yeah.
regardless.
Or if they're just guilty,
Right.
Like, or if
Yeah.
they've done it,
Right.
Yeah.
I love that about him. I mean, there's all frustrations, I think, with my humanity of like wanting to judge and be like, well, they don't deserve it, or this guy's guilty, he deserves to be healed, maybe before this other guy. And that's not a good thing that my heart thinks that, but when I really break it down, Jesus doesn't pick and choose. And so for that reason, I love the story that he does actually note that, like that this guy, it wasn't his parents sinning. I have a different reason for it, but it sort of opens the door for all of us, whether the sins in our lives or the problems or the heaviness that we see, whether it's our fault or not, we are all welcome to come in. And I think there's like a double story here. I'm actually about Sunday preaching on the other man that received sight from Mark. Similar story, but different, Bartimaeus. And I think in both stories, there's a double vision given, that both their physical sight is given and restored, but because of that, there's this kingdom vision that they are both given of seeing, wow, this is spiritually, my eyes are opened, and this is bigger. This guy isn't maybe just a prophet, and maybe there's something else going on here. And so it's like a second vision, I think, that they're given of who Jesus is and what his kingdom really is.
Yeah, and because I'm kind of like the blind guy here, like what Jonah started with, and I agree with you. Like, we could spend the whole time on whether it was, or we can have a theological discussion. At the end of the day, I don't know. And Jesus knew, but like I'm kind of like the guy. He's like, I don't know who he was or what, but all I know is I couldn't see, and now I can. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay.
Mm-hmm. A difference I see too, maybe in his spiritual sight gained, is the faith of this man, versus in this story you see the Pharisees pushing back, and in some sense, well, maybe that's not fair. It says they were divided, so maybe some of the Pharisees were leaning that way and genuinely curious, but some of them, it's for sure they lacked that faith to see. An interesting piece of that to me, as I've thought about this story this week, is power, and the power that these Pharisees held, and how Jesus' healing this man was offensive to them. But I think so much of that comes back to their fear of, who is this man? What power is he taking away? But then you even see them turn on the victim, so to speak, and kick him out of the synagogue. And his parents are worried they're going to be kicked out too. And when you read this, you're like, he didn't do anything except get healed. He received Jesus' healing, and that was it. And yet the Pharisees, some of them at least in this story, were so concerned about power that they were kicking people out of the synagogue to even follow Moses, as they claimed. They weren't even allowing them to do that because of their faith in Jesus. And so, I don't know. It's an interesting power dynamic that I see going on.
For the man, the thing that his parents were most afraid of is, after his experience, he's like, I'm not worried about that.
Right.
He's like, this is not a concern of mine. It's, who is the Son of Man? And, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need this synagogue anymore.
Right. And I don't love how his parents handled it. I mean, in some ways, they kind of threw him under the bus of like, he's a man, he can answer for himself. And we're, whoa. Like, don't get us involved here. We're not a part of this. Go ask him. And I don't love that, because in terms of power dynamic, I see themselves concerned about themselves and protecting themselves in this power dynamic of, well, if I answer one way, I'm going to get kicked out of the synagogue if I stand up for my son. And to be honest, in that moment, I see parents that chose themselves over their own son.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, I agree with both. Like that, it shows the power that the religious leaders had within the community. I mean, because like, I can't speak for the parents, but I would imagine they just had their son who can now see. It's an incredible thing. And so I can't imagine your first impulse is like, I don't want to tell nobody about this. But then they get questioned about it, and then you're like, oh, crud. Like everything is fixing to be gone. We don't know much about them. I mean, they may have been standing in the community and had, oh, I can't lose that or lose this, and they're going to come. And then they're like, I don't know. That's him, and of age. We don't even know necessarily what that means. It's not like of age would be maybe very different than what we would say now. Like in my head, if I just turn my brain off, I'm going, he's in his 30s. It's some grown adult. It might not have been.
Yeah, we don't know.
Of age, I mean, he may have been,
13.
13-year-old
Yeah,
boy.
if that was in question, then yeah, it does make us maybe think that he's younger.
On the younger side, because they would never have, they might have spoken to your parents, hey, isn't this him? But you'd go, okay. It would be a little bit younger. Hey, aren't you?
He was
his
begging,
parents?
so that makes me ask a lot of questions. If he was
Yeah.
13 and begging, did his parents hey,
Just kind of get rid
exploit him
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
go out and I don't know.
Because let's just pretend you lived in that community, and this was the mindset: is do you really want the blind? Lack of a better term, blight on your family staying at the house,
Right.
Because parents, they weren't perfect. They would know, man, if he's around us, this is an indicator of what we had done in the past. So
Sure.
see you. You're now of age. Go take care of yourself. Well, there ain't nothing he can do. So then he's now begging, and you're going, okay. So then we don't know. I'm not going to speculate on their relationship, but you go. He was out there begging, and he has family that was close. Like, this is not like they could take a plane and fly across the country. They were in the same geographic area.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so you'd go, okay, if he's out begging, they left him high and dry. We don't know, but you're like, what in the world out of this relationship? We assume, because our parental relationships probably here in this room, or maybe we had loss in here, but our remembrance of them, they're good. We don't know this. This may have been, they didn't get along anymore because that's why he's out begging. But still they bring, so then we're going, it's so much in the story, but I do like, because this is the magnificent part of it, if you really look at it, the real deal, Jesus is saying, look, you want to see? Here you go. It's just easy.
One of the things I had read in a commentary that also made me think in terms of power and seeing all these different characters of the story. You've got the crowds, Jesus, the man healed, his parents, Pharisees that seemingly are kind of even divided about how to handle this. But it was also saying, Tacitus, this historian, had said that Vespasian, who had healed blindness with spittle or mud before, like it was documented that he had. And so it's Vespasian's son that's ruling right now as a Roman emperor. And that maybe some of this story, the reason that only John, other stories we've read and is in the Synoptic Gospels, but this one's only found in John, but that maybe John's contrasting this with this Roman emperor to say Jesus has... you've heard that he can heal blindness, but so can Jesus. But more than that, he can heal from spiritual blindness. That was interesting to me, and something I, of course, don't inherently know the history of that. But especially in that power dynamic of the author speaking to both the power of the Pharisees, the power, you see even a little bit of his parents wrestling with this idea of power, but the author, John, talking about the power with Rome at the same time, and that in a sense, and remember, we're like all back to Jesus, and that was, we've talked about this on this podcast about that being one of his main temptations, that Satan was coming, whenever he was out in the wilderness and just tempting him with power. And I don't know, this story, I think, is a fascinating study of power dynamics of religious leaders. As I've studied that just in my own life with institutions and churches, two of the biggest things that I think can bring healing to those spaces is curiosity and humility. That as I was thinking through the story, wondered what would it have looked like if the Pharisees had those two things. Now, again, about half of them maybe at least were curious and asked, kind of, wanted to hear more. But just when we see these power dynamics in churches and institutions, if they had curiosity and humility to say, maybe we're not getting this right. Like, we have been sold out for following Moses, or whoever, but what if we're missing something? What if we're not 100% right? And then the curiosity to ask questions about it. I do think they ask questions, but they're questions that they already know the answer. Again, I think so much of that comes back to that power dynamic. And even though they're asking questions, I still think they lack curiosity because they're trying to trap, or they already know the answer to that, or the answer they want, at least, to that question.
Yeah, like that, when I look at it, it's, lack of a better term, it's like the police, I like the police, but when they ask some of our people questions, they're just trying to get at the answer they already know and they want to get. There's no questions. They don't really hear the answer. They're just leading a person to say the thing they want them to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, so how much do we do that as parents?
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
I'm guilty of that. This is a lesson absolutely to myself, to be humble and curious, even in parenting.
And it like, the truth of it is, even for us, the Pharisees and all that, it'd be like to truly ask the questions and not sure what answer you're going to get is scary as crud. Yep. Who wants that in this world that we live in? Like, we want to ask questions because, I'm a question asker. Okay, do I really want to hear the answers that could come?
Yeah.
And I'm just saying me. And a lot of times if I really look inside of my heart, I don't. I want to ask the questions that I know and make sense to me. That's normal.
I think what's interesting too is, I'm just thinking about it from this passage, but then as you reflect on others, like instances in which the Pharisees are involved, they, at least from the text, appear quite quick to come to their conclusions. Like, they don't really take much time for consideration.
Right.
At least in a way. Yeah. And we don't know, like, the timelines of this. Was this 20 minutes? Was it 40 minutes? Was it an hour? Or was it immediate that it was like...
Time for him to go away because he got questioned twice.
Yeah.
So maybe longer than we're initially thinking.
But it's like, did they actually sit and ruminate and consider and consult and that sort of thing? Or was it just, no, like, that's wrong. Like, we're right. You're incorrect. And whatever that first thought that comes to my mind is what's the truth,
Yeah, verse 22 had said about the parents, they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue.
Yeah.
So if the parents knew that in this scenario, it maybe tells us a little bit about the hardness of heart and their lack of curiosity.
Yeah, I like that. And then, as a leader, it's something that should cause us to say, do I take time to consider, to think, to ruminate, to ask, is God at work in this in a way that I don't understand? Before it's like, no, that's wrong, or we're doing this, or that sort of thing.
And I think, I don't mean to keep talking about power, but when I think if you had to rank these characters in terms of power, you would see the religious leaders at the top, then maybe the parents, and then at the bottom would be the guy healed. And so how much easier it is for those without power to be curious and humble and change their mind. And the higher you go up on that ladder, the harder it is, because it requires an opening of your hand and giving up of power and saying, man, I've been running the synagogue for 40 years. What if I'm wrong?
Yeah. And notice it's the man at the bottom end of that pyramid. We could call it an inverted one.
Yeah.
Who's okay getting mud smeared on his face.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally. And no chance are the Pharisees going to allow that to happen, and let alone someone's spit being spat on the ground in the dirt, made mud, put it on your face. Even knowing the story, if somebody's like, hey, I want to heal you, I'm going to spit on the dirt and put it on your body. I'm like, no.
No thanks.
Yeah, not interested. That doesn't sound like social distancing to me.
Did you wash your hands?
Yeah. So isn't it like, there's, things to be said there, but there's also this like, Jesus spat on the ground and put mud on this guy. Like, why? And I know you kind of already brought it up, but like, why do you have to do that? And it's kind of gross and it's weird and it's humiliating. But it's this man wasn't like bothered by it. And then he went through the town to the pool to wash his face. And everybody's seeing he's got, spit mud on his face. And it's interesting. And so for me, like, I don't want to jump straight to the pastoral note, but like the pastoral note for me, like as I'm, a recovering pastor, is, we have to, it's messy a lot of the time for Jesus to do important work on us. And like, it feels gross and it's humiliating and embarrassing to like, if you're dealing with something, to come to your community and be like, hey, nobody knows this. And there's this really gross, bad thing that I'm dealing with. And it's humiliating.
My mind on the dirt and this is unresearched. So my mind though immediately thinks of creation in Genesis and God creating man from dirt. The Hebrew word there is really more like dirt man or dirt human that I've created. It's not actually, in those first few chapters, it's not even a proper name, Adam. It's just like the dirt man that I created. But it makes me wonder on a maybe creation theology, is that a glimpse of Jesus saying like, nope, I'm bringing this new humanity that is later talked about in Ephesians, and this is the new creation of man, both seeing physically and spiritually in the kingdom. And is there, I don't know, just a greater creation story kind of going on here?
That's good.
Because we do know, like we don't maybe know the answer. Like if we've learned anything from these stories, nothing was by happenstance. Like Jesus could have just as easily, and in other stories, and now you see. It's done. Like in this one, we have this physical act of picking up dirt, spitting on dirt, rubbing dirt in the eyes, telling the dude to walk across town to go to the pool to wash the deal off. There would have been a reason. I mean, because he didn't have to do that. We've seen, paralytic dude, you can't walk, get up. Not, hey, I'm going to rub some dirt on your back and a lightning bolt's going to come strike you and you're healed. No, he could just heal. Yeah. Another one, the woman, all she got to do is just touch his tassel. He didn't rub anything on her. And he's like, the spirit just came out of me and healed. So this, you're going, why? And I'm not going to answer for Jesus. I don't know. That's intriguing to me because it's always been, I'm like, that's odd. Like, why in the world did he get dirt and spit on it and rub it on his eyes? And it may be like this. It was this teaching moment because this miracle had occurred in another form that the people would know. They'd already known that somebody had brought sight back to somebody else by rubbing. I don't know. Or it could be like, it could be magnificent if you're really a illustrating teacher. There may be other things we don't. Hey, this dirt. This is where we all came from, but there's healing or whatever, and then rub it on the eyes and watch this. What you thought you saw before, it's no more. Like what? And then go to water, because we've gone, so then water's in the metaphor too in several different ways. So then out of this water that came straight from Jesus, was the healing power, and then got this thing, and then dirt and mud and all these things that we're going, oh, that's sin, and I'm dirty, and all these metaphors. I don't know.
Yeah,
And
I've
then,
wondered if the water is like a baptism.
okay, great. So then water plays in this as well. So then I go to water, and I went in and I couldn't see, but now I can. So what is baptism? And you go, well, why does water and cleaning off this filth that we carry around with us? What do we say? You are a new creation. And I don't know, but you're going, it's interesting to look, because these things do play. They're in the story for a reason, and not because then the fact we don't understand it doesn't mean I don't get this story. The same as we're starting. I don't understand like the question, and I do struggle with, because there's some things that happen because our parents did things that are ramifications. So there is that part of this world, and then there's also no, there's not, and then there's this miracle, and then the power and all that stuff. You're like, ay. There's a whole lot in it. And then even the guys respond, I don't know what happened. I just know this. I couldn't, and now I can.
And he turns into a disciple and a sharer of really this message of what happened to him. Verse 30, the man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from. Yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. And nobody has ever heard of the opening of the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So he preaches back at the Pharisees because of everything he experiences. And then they said, who are you? You're steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?
Oh, man.
And they throw him out.
That is that power dynamic. Like, there's such an irony, and I kind of love the snark in the way that this is written of the man healed. And like, I almost picture a smirk on his face of like, you're going to come at me and ask me what just happened when clearly, like, I was blind and now I can see, but you're coming at me? Like, are you nervous?
And it shows that, like, the disciples weren't crazy for assuming maybe he had sinned or something like that, or his parents, because they say you were steeped in sin at birth, which just seems like to us, it's like, oh, that's, a mean thing to say, but that seems like a really intense, like, insult. Like, you were steeped in sin at birth.
Can you imagine much worse?
Hello, Calvin.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting conversation. Maybe next time on
right.
the Wonders podcast.
Or not.
But yeah, it's like, seems like one of the most intense things that they could say. I don't know. Like, it's...
Well, it would be devastating hurt.
Yeah.
If your identification, and so it was quick. So this is how they would look. Like, this is how he was looked upon in society, in his world, because it was within a half a second out of their mouth. Who are you? Like, so when it comes down to it, everything was fine and good. Okay, I got a cuss. Hey, who was this guy who did this for you? Come on, tell me. You know who it was. I don't really know. Okay, come on, tell me. And then he comes back a little bit, and they're like, hold on, Slick. Who are you to speak to me square? Because we know who you are. You're the guy that was born out of sin. Because of what
your whole existence.
Your whole existence is this.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me to think about, like, if we put that in modern terms. Okay, so I'm female, so my mind immediately thinks maybe there's a woman in a church with breast cancer or something like that, and she, went to her elders and was just like, I'm healed, and they're like, who do you think you are? Like, you've been the one that's battling cancer for the last 10 years. Clearly, you are a sinner. Who do you think you are coming to us and saying, challenging what we believe in this guy? We would see that and think, hopefully we would see it and think, that's awful. Like, gosh, you guys are so consumed with power and giving it up that you're not even in a pastoral place to be able to rejoice with the healing that just happened. All you are consumed with is maintaining your power in this moment. And so this was a quote I found from one of Scott McKnight's books on this gospel, and it said, I see this as what happens when powerful men are challenged by unpowerful people. That is, when the veracity of their authority is put at risk, powerful leaders power up, and then gaslight their critics. In most cases, those around the powerful people support the powerful and then too often attack, gaslight, and discredit the ones who accuse and who are in need of empathy and healing. So in light of that, I thought about, honestly, the pastoral failing of these religious leaders, that if they're over this local synagogue, these towns aren't big. I mean, they likely knew this man, knew he was born blind, know his parents. They know who they are in the community. It's not some Joe that showed up, that they've never seen before. And so they're intertwined in all these interpersonal relationships. But when they could have been pastoring with curiosity and humility, instead it turns into this gaslighting fight of, and they keep pestering him and almost borderline bullying him. Like they summon him a second time. And man, if I was in his shoes.
And throwing him out of synagogue.
Right.
Which is like clearly he wasn't a part of either because he was blind,
Right.
And we got to, in it, so then we got to come, because the end, to bring clarity, is, the guy says, I believe, and he worshiped Jesus. And then I love this, okay, because we can't not go in Jesus' mind. So roughly the same stuff. So the translation says, then this is what Jesus said, okay, point blank. I've come to judge the world. I've come to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they can see that they are blind. And then the Pharisees heard this, and they asked, okay, can you imagine, and we don't put the right tone in it, because it'd be incredulous. Are you saying we are blind? So, and then Jesus says, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, but you remain guilty because you claim you can see. Brilliant. So then out of this, he says, now, this is, for me, I don't understand the miracle, but it is. You go, I've come to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they can see that they are blind. What in the world? We could do 10 podcasts on just what in the world that sentence means and probably miss the mark. I don't even know how much weight is in that, because we live in a world that there's many people who think they have much clarity. So then out of that, you're going, well, somebody who thinks they have clarity and they can see, well, then they're missing the mark. Or somebody who can't see at all, then they got the mark. You're going, I don't know. And then the religious leaders are going, hold on. Are you? And then we can look at this story and go, oh, look at them. They're going, what are you saying? We're blind? And you go, look at them idiots. How often do we do it ourselves? And how often is the world we live in, are we the one we're getting the same question? Hold on. What are you saying? I don't understand. Hold on. And then probably, I'm holding the book. I understand the book. I know what the book says. Matter of fact, you put me in charge of this whole area to tell everybody what the book means. You're going to tell me I'm blind? I see better than that. And you're going, oh my gosh, huge. And then out of that, so what Kay likes, and an amazing mic drop. Now, you would be all right if you would admit that you are blind, but you're still saying you can see. So that's why you are still guilty. Bum, done. Story done.
There's such an interesting thing to think about, the humility that opened up the way for this man's faith to, in some ways he was gifted with this great gift of healing that would be so life-altering. Maybe it would be easy to have that much faith, but you just see so much humility in him, and even the way that he answers the questions of look, I don't know. But what I do know is I was blind and now I can see. That's all I know. And
then his response, and you see it time and time again, what does he do? At the end of the day, he worshiped Jesus because that's all he knew to do. Brilliant sentence. That one, he worshiped him.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if when he said that, I was blind, but now I see, was he thinking in his head spiritually and not just physically? Like, was he even playing at words with them of like, yeah, I was blind just like you, but now I see him as somebody different, and I think he's the Messiah.
So, all of this to say, brilliant passage. There's a ton going on it. So then we got to say, okay, so out of this, which we've sort of touched on, so then what would we say? Why is it even relative? Because this is not written in 2024. This is not on somebody's TikTok account. Maybe it is now, because maybe
it's
somebody
out
has
there.
it. It's
Jeff,
always
are
there.
you on TikTok?
I don't know. Are we on TikTok, Bobby? Jeff is not, but
not.
Feed My
Oh,
Sheep
I
is.
missed.
I am on TikTok.
I can just see Jeff doing those TikTok dances. You know?
Next week,
We
we'll be
might
back.
pass on that option. But so out of this, tell me, why is it relevant? Why is anybody listening to this? How does it even play into anybody's life, and what does it still teach today?
I have something metaphysical that's like half baked that I'm like kind of working through, and that is it's around this idea of like the Pharisees seeing themselves as like the exclusive holders of truth, and that, let me think through this. I think if our confidence in Jesus, we should recognize something as truth. But when we're encountering others who are experiencing things, who are asking questions, who are dealing with hard things, that sort of thing, approaching those situations, as Karen talked a lot about, with a lot of curiosity. And I think we get ourselves in trouble, and we may find that we are blind as the Pharisees if we just like assume that we're the key holders to truth. And that's not a privilege that we've been given, of like, we don't hold the key to the truth. We should be mystified and amazed by the truth of the gospel and have just a massive amount of questions about it, and never use it as like, this is the truth that I use to hurt you with, or that I am the holder, I hold the key to this truth. It's no, I am just a mystified recipient of this grace and mercy called the gospel, and I'm figuring out too, and I don't understand it. It fascinates me, and I want to help you figure out truth as well, and this truth is for you as well. Yeah, I don't know. That's really half-baked, really like...
I hear what you're saying.
Like a jellyfish of an
Okay.
idea, you know. But
So I think for our listeners that might be freaking out at the slippery slope
yeah,
of that.
slippery slope. There's no slippery slope intended.
Well,
Yeah.
but to that, I would say, yes, like I get that postmodern slippery slope, then what is truth and what do we hold on to? But the answer is Jesus.
Yeah.
And the simplicity of Jesus is what we hold on to. And so when we think that we have all of these right religious answers, whether it's church leaders like these guys in the synagogue or even parents, at the end of the day, we have to just hold on to Jesus and who he was and ask, maybe, are we following our religious ideas that we have so tenaciously held on to and known that we are right in, or are we following a person of Jesus?
Yeah. And be mystified and fascinated by him, and never like, oh, we got him pinned down.
Yes.
Like, this is what, you know, it's easy, it's simple, we got it. But to be mystified and fascinated by the truth and the goodness and the beauty and the person of Jesus, and what that means.
Yeah, and I think that is the answer to our sight and blindness. We can, even with our own religious legalism and pride of thinking that we have all the right answers, we can make ourselves blind to the person of Jesus by doing that. And I think it requires an opening of that hand and a humility and a curiosity to hold on to Jesus and only Jesus. And
Yeah. So sorry to go all metaphysical. On
No,
that.
but like, and
It's good.
but it's good, and I would say in that old man answer to that is I say this in my head a ton of times in a day. I've only now learned there's two truths in this world. Like that's taken me a long time to understand this. There's two truths in my little world. I'm not so. Number one, that God is who He says He is. That there is a God. Okay. That's number one. So I believe and I live in response to that. And number two, I am not that God. And so then that leaves the door open of an ununderstandability of like the guy, I don't know how this just happened, but I know this truth that there is a greater thing out there than me that is in charge of this deal. I don't know how this happened. I just know it did.
Yeah.
And I know this thing occurred. And so I'm all right with not being able to explain everything. Because if then I would take the next step. If I can explain, like if we could dissect this thing, this story even here, and nail it exactly what was going on, then what does that make us? That makes us God. I am not that. So I'm all right, even though the human mind doesn't want to come to that place. There is questions I don't know the answer to. But I do know the answer. There is an there must be in the world, because then I won't go, well, we'll get new agey a little bit, okay? It would absolutely be devastatingly sad to me to try to live in a world that there was no absolute truth like a God. Why? What is the point of existence if you are it?
Yeah.
Then any questions you would have would be devastating and then you would have to lash out to those who question what you believe because you are it.
I would add a third truth to there is a God, I am not Him, but He loves us like crazy.
Well, okay. Agreed.
Because I think that
That's key.
even the Pharisees in this story believed there was a God, probably believed that they were not Him,
Fair.
but I'm not fully sure that they grasped how deep and how wide His love was. That back to some of that pride, His love wasn't reserved just for them. It was far deeper and wider than I think they and us perceive it. When we do get in those spots where we're like, who do you think you are? Talking about Him or teaching me about Him when I think I know who He is or whatever. But
Very valid. Like that one. And I guess that would be a great addition to the story, because the truth, something occurred that was like, but that. And then out of this, it's all right to be able to say this sentence, I don't truly grasp, nor will we until we get into what the next life would be, what the depth of His love truly looks like for us.
I think this story can be a great encouragement in that of we don't have to know much, but just again back to the person of Jesus and who He is, and that this blind man didn't have all of this theological knowledge that the synagogue leaders had, but he knew one thing, and it was Jesus. I think when I was in college, I was at this one particular year at a pretty conservative Bible college, and there almost became this like trend of rebaptism in students wrestling with, well, I got baptized when I was 5 or 10, and I didn't know then what I know now, and I think I need to redo it because I know so much more. And I remember wrestling with that of like, well, yeah, I know a whole lot more now than I did. And I would say the same today as somebody in my mid-40s. I know a lot more than I did when I was 12 and got baptized. But really, at the end of the day, all you need to know is Jesus and what He's done. And I think, like we've talked about in so many other stories on this podcast, of the kingdom leaking in, like this is just one more example of that kingdom leaking in, but a man who not only started following Jesus in that, but his eyes were open to this kingdom leaking in around him. And he sees what the blind man sees, the seeing synagogue leaders do not see. That should be both a warning and great news.
Well,
So, yeah, there's
bring it.
that. You bring it.
No, you bring it.
You land this plane.
No, what we're going to say. So out of that, the hope, as well, if you're driving, I hope you're not blind.
That
Okay,
would
so
be- that would be
not a
unfortunate.
good deal. Okay, so you have your eyes open, but I do hope that, let's just say this. I hope that if we're listening, I hope in this room that we have our eyes wide open, but we understand our inability to see. That we are blind, and we desire, and this I've learned in my world here. I don't know if this is a true theological sentence. I don't know. I didn't go to seminary, so I'll say it. This prayer ought to scare the crap out of you. God, open my eyes that I shall see. And to see if you really have the guts to say that prayer and really want to see as he would desire for you to see. Because I promise you, if you do that, you will see things that you will never forget and that you didn't really want to see.
And good things.
And
too.
good things, good beauty. Like, so that doesn't mean bad. There's beauty in this world. There's so many things, but you will see. And so out of this, you would go, I hope our world will see. It's a beautiful place. Like, and these things, it's a beautiful story. Let's not leave that. You can't. It is a beautiful story that a person that was living in darkness no longer lives in darkness.
I'll add one thing
Yeah.
to wrap that up. I was several months ago studying the Hebrew word for humility and trying to wrap my head around what did it mean for them in their own language. How do we change that in English and in our modern ways? But one of the things I kept coming to is humility is, I think you may have heard that it's not thinking of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less or something like that. But I would say the Hebrew vision of it is seeing yourself in right relationship to God and to other people. And I think that maybe alludes to that beauty of the vision, both seeing yourself, you are not God. The truth number 2, we are not him. And there is both joy in the answer of Jesus to that, that we desperately need him, but there's joy in that, and joy in seeing ourselves in right relationship to other people of, maybe this blind man was filled with joy after and couldn't wait to tell other people what happened to him and how he saw both physically and spiritually, and couldn't wait to bring others in. Maybe he even got to meet with one of these synagogue leaders in the dark of night like Nicodemus did and got to share with him how he really came to see both things. And so I think, sorry, to wrap it all up, maybe just the humility of being able to know ourselves in relationship to others and to God, and to have literally a vision for what he's done for us and what that means for us. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Well, the Wanderers podcast is a series of the Collage podcast produced at Feed My Sheep. Our panel includes Jonah Fox, Jeff Stiegel, Karen Smith, and myself, Roy Rhodes, with occasional guests from around our community. Our producer is Bobby Jeffers. Thank you for journeying with us as we wander through the stories of Scripture and wonder at God's redemptive work in Jesus.